one.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining. My name is Anthony Loss, and I am a lead solutions architect at ClearScale. And today we are going to talk about cost optimization in the cloud, primarily AWS, but these general principles can be replicated across any cloud platform. But wanted to take the time today to extend some of our knowledge and some of what we've learned in the past when building AWS environments that have to align to businesses, both small and big, and their budgets and what they want to be able to allocate as far as spend in the cloud and in their IT infrastructure. And so we'll be going through some of this. I'll get into the agenda here in a little bit, but allow me to do more of a formal introduction. Again, my name's Anthony Loss. I am a lead solutions architect here at ClearScale. I've been an AWS architect for 7.5 years now, and I've been in the AWS industry for about that time. So I have a good amount of the good fortune of working with a lot of customers on this very specific topic. So we're excited to talk you through this here today. And so just a quick overview of ClearScale. We are an all-in AWS partner. Everything that we do is within the AWS environment. We focus on a number of pillars: application development, application modernization, AWS infrastructure such as migrations. We focus on data and analytics, data lakes, and AI and ML. We also have a managed services team for our customers after engagement to support them on an ongoing basis. We have end-to-end services all the way from the application UI throughout the persistent data storage. And we've been an AWS Premier Partner for, I believe, 12 or 13 years now. So we're very established within the network. Okay, so for the agenda, we are going to talk a little bit about 4 different areas. Why cloud costs are a growing concern, some quick tips, 6 ways to reduce cloud spend, and real-world case studies. We'll go into each of these, and I'll do my best to explain our perspective from it and what we've learned. So when you have the good fortune, such as our architects at ClearScale, of working with many customers that are adopting the cloud, like I said, both big and small, they always go in wide-eyed. And unfortunately, after about a year, they find that they have been spending more than they maybe were sold upon, or spending more than they've allocated, and it's not a great situation. So 82% of organizations said implementing cloud systems became more expensive than initially thought. Cloud public spend was 13% over budget, and then approximately 32% of cloud spend is wasted. And when you have infinite amount of resources in the public cloud, it's very easy to use a lot of resources. And so it's very important to have a optimization practice and a monitoring practice around some of these things, in which we'll get here into in a second. But it's very important also to understand that both small and big businesses struggle with having cloud control over their resources and expenditure. And so there are a number of ways to go about it, but we'll talk a little bit about that in just a second here. But essentially, right, we all know what the cloud offers, right? It's pay-as-you-go pricing. It's unlimited resources. You have all sorts of goofy names for things, whether you're in AWS or Microsoft Azure or GCP. Everything has its own name that may not be very straightforward. And so you end up just spinning resources up and not having a lot of understanding of how to spin down or how to be cost efficient with them. And so it's almost so available by fault into what it's leveraging customers to be able to do. And then eventually, having them spin out of control with the resources that you're using. So we'll get into how best to optimize and stay on top of that. I've made some quick tips for cost optimization, okay? The first one, and I cannot stress this enough, is that cost ops, you'll hear me say cost ops, I say that short for cost optimization. Cost ops is a continuous process. A lot of enterprise customers that I work with have a biannually cost ops exercise. And so they'll have like July 1st or January 1st, right? They'll have this cost optimization exercise that they'll do twice a year and find themselves way off track. And I don't recommend this process. Instead, I recommend a weekly or bi-weekly process in which you are continuously looking over your cost optimization and what you've done in the previous week or 2 weeks, and then realigning on track. It is a continuous process, especially when you have a large environment. It's not a one and done. It's not a two and done. You never want to sacrifice customer experience for cost optimization. And this is going to bleed into point 3 here in a minute. But once we are sacrificing customer experience just for cost optimization, now we are being counterproductive and we're not putting our best foot forward and using the cloud in an appropriate manner. So it's important that we are, again, not sacrificing your customer's experience or your internal user's experience just to save a buck. And like I said, that really bleeds into number 3. Cost optimization does not mean cost reduction. It means maximizing on ROI, return on investment. I'll say that one more time. Cost ops does not mean cost reduction. It means maximizing return on investment. So a lot of times we'll be engaged with a customer or a partner, and they're looking to say, hey, we want cost optimization, and they're looking for X amount of savings or X amount of reduction in cost. And it turns out that there are other ways to have cost optimized exercises without actually reducing cost, but more maximizing the return on investment over the long run. So for example, if we were to do a cost optimization engagement, ideally by the end of the engagement, we want X amount percentage cost reduction. But a lot of times after the end of the engagement, we're right around the same cost, but the way that we have architected it over the next 6 months to a year, the return on investment is actually going to save you more money than the initial cost, initial savings. So again, cost optimization does not mean cost reduction. You want to use AWS savings plans and reserved instances as often as possible. AWS, if you're on AWS, it provides a plethora of cost optimization tools to manage your costs, and then continuously monitor your usage. We'll talk about this here in a little bit, but it's very important to establish a monitoring environment, and that goes along with the continuous optimization. The continuous process in point 1 that feeds right into monitoring your usage. So it's important that we have a systematic approach in place for monitoring. I've gone ahead and made 6 ways to maximize your cloud ROI, right? And so the first one is to focus on total cost of ownership, not only upfront costs. The second one is to reduce architectural complexity. Third is to analyze resources often. Fourth is to use service catalogs. Fifth is use savings plans and reserved instances. And 6 is use SOA when possible, service-oriented architecture. And we'll get into that here in a minute. I'm going to go through each of these 6, but these were primarily the 6 things that came to our mind. I wanted to jot them down, and what we have seen with customers. Again, this is not an opinionated. This is not ClearScale's opinion. It's not my opinion. This is what we have found when engaging with customers, both big and small, of how to maximize the return on investment. And again, the return on investment is cloud optimization. Okay, so TCO. And I'm sure everyone knows what total cost of ownership means, but I want to relay it as it relates to AWS. And so when you have a TCO, you think about the purchase and setup costs. Now, a lot of times when customers are looking to move to AWS, they may see a high implementation cost from a partner, or they might want to purchase reserved instances, but that's a high cost off the bat. And so they kind of get timid and pushed away from the cloud. And I want to negate these feelings, right? Operation and maintenance costs, that's also part of TCO. And then human resources and training costs as well as part of TCO. These 3 things combined, optimized in a way that's most efficient, will maximize your ROI investment, right? Or your ROI. And so again, the point one purchase and setup cost, that can be thought of as CapEx. Operation and maintenance costs can be thought of as OpEx, operational expense. And then human resources and training costs is a huge piece of the pie when you are investing in yourselves or investing in your cloud platform. So when you are thinking cost optimization, think of CapEx, OpEx, and human resources and training costs. If you keep these three things in mind and how it's going to play out, then you're really leveraging a strategic mindset to move forward in your cost optimization. Reduce architectural complexity. Okay, so what's so great about AWS and just the cloud in general, you have native architectures, and nobody loves cloud native architectures more than me, and how cool and unique they can be, how they can serve your customers, how they can differ from your competitors. All of that is great, right? But we don't want to do overkill. In order to have the most savings, right, and the most ROI, you need a centralized IT architecture and a very simple as possible IT architecture. So you can have different business units that have the same type of templates and resources and the same architectural guidance to optimize each other's resources, and also for less overhead in managing an environment. If you look at the graphic on the right, you can see all types of usages, right? You have many different step functions, Lambda functions, many different databases. Now, I'm not saying that this architecture is wrong, but I'm saying that this approach to any architecture is not the best approach. You want to start with a templatized best practice architecture, maybe something like on the left where it's a 3-layer, where you have your web layer, your application layer, and then your data storage layer. Now we can use that and multiply it for how many business units or how many applications you may have, so that we're using the same sort of methodology. The overhead is a lot less, and we're not spinning up resources that are out of control. And so the more reduced the architecture is, usually the more optimized your cost is going to be. So even if you do have a complex architecture, still strive for simplicity. Okay, analyze, and then analyze that again. We always say, when we work with our customers, analyze that analyzation. So that is something you want to keep in mind too. AWS offers a great tools such as Cost Explorer and usage reports, as you see on your right, that you can break down what you're spending your money in. And then there's also some really good third-party tools such as Splunk that you can integrate into your AWS environment or cloud environment in general, and use to review costs, take a look at forecasts, set metrics, custom metrics. You can set notifications if a certain environment or a certain resource is beginning to utilize more than what you budgeted for that regarding cost. And you can actually, from notifications, implement automated remediation within your cloud environment to either shut off a resource or scale down or so on and so forth, right? So it all starts with a good monitoring practice. And this is what we mean when we say cost optimization is a continuous process. We need monitoring, not only around application performance, as important as that is, but also around cost optimization and what we're spending and what we've budgeted for. And all these little pieces work together in making sure that you are optimizing your cloud usage. This is a really big one, and I wish more customers adopted this, because the customers that I've seen adopt this have really benefited over the long run. And that is to catalog your resources. What do I mean when I say catalog your resources? Well, when you have different development teams, let's say I have an application team, right? Application team 1 and application team 2. Let's say they're working on 2 different applications, but the infrastructure that they need is the same. Let's say application team 1 wants to spin up XYZ servers, but application team 2 wants to spin up 5 more servers, right? A lot of times, application team 2 or the second application team, in order to either develop a better product or compete more with application team 1, may spin up extra resources than are needed. And so you want to be able to provide resources to your development teams on a cataloged base level. Okay, so think of it as permission based as far as how many resources that they can spin up. So when you have a centralized cloud environment, which is why we always recommend that, we can provide catalogs to your resources. So pre-approved resources, you can limit the provisioning by dev teams, reducing costs, as it relates to my example of application team 1 and application team 2. And then when you catalog your resources, you're managing them in one place. So let's say, back to my application team 1, application team 2. Let's say application team 2 needs a slightly different arsenal of resources than application team 1. Well, I can go into the catalog. Instead of doing it a per use case basis, I can create a new catalog for application team 2, limit the permissions of how much they're allowed to spin up. And now I'm making sure I stay underneath my budget for both application teams. And it's really, really important, okay, to catalog your resources and catalog what your teams can access during either development, or maybe it's even production, right? Or when they're doing canary testing, how many canaries can they send out in order to both achieve the unit, the goal of testing, and also be under budget and optimize as much as possible. So please catalog your resources. We talked a little bit about savings plans and reserved instances. The AWS has a ton of documentation on how much RIs and savings plans save you money, right? And we could spend a whole hour talking about the data around that. But in general, it's good to know that around 72% can be saved in reserved instances when it is compared to on-demand capacity. Now, a lot of times when you are using a partner to architect your infrastructure, we're so focused on the architecture, right, that we're not actually leveraging RIs and AWS savings plans. And so it's really, really important from a partner standpoint and from a customer standpoint to keep this at top of mind, right? How are we using reserved instances? Are we utilizing savings plans? What's the compute cost look like? How are we keeping this under control? If I'm going to be using a certain workload year round and I know what the capacity needs to be, there's no reason why we should have on demand. We should use reserved instances. Well, maybe there's a lot of workloads that we don't know what the capacity is going to be, but we know it's going to be over X amount. We know we're going to have this much compute in a year. We just don't know when we're going to use it. Well, then maybe AWS savings plans is a great example for that, where you are guaranteeing, or I guess promising an amount of CPU usage in return from heavy discounts offered by AWS. Okay, so it's very, very important to keep these things in mind. And obviously, reserved instances and savings plans allow for all upfront expenditure in order to get maximum discounts, partial upfront or no upfront payments. SOA, service-oriented architectures. I did an entire blog regarding this particularly, and I think that service-oriented architectures is a good use case for so many reasons. But today I'll just talk about it for cost optimization. Number one, it allows for only using resources when needed. So hence service-oriented. When you need a service, it allows those resources to be spun up and used, and then when you're not using it, to be spun down, right? This is a good use case for serverless architecture. Modular ownership keeps costs down. If I have microservices, right? If I have an application that has, 4, 5, 6 different containers, those containers are usually aligned to a different development team or a feature set team. And when I have modular ownership, then I can keep costs down because I can more easily track who's working on what and what environment matches to what team that I have internally, or even what employee. If I have John, Joe, and Sarah working on an application and it's modularly broken out, then I'll know that John and Joe have these components and then Sarah has these components, right? So that is why modular ownership can keep costs down, because it has a lot more visibility into who's working on what, not to mention a service-oriented architecture with containers or serverless technologies naturally are just less expensive. And that goes into the third point. They are less expensive than traditional servers, right? So if I have 10 EC2 instances, versus, a container with, 10 images. It's going to be a lot less expensive because I'm sharing the resource and I'm using task-based architecture as opposed to traditional legacy technology, which involves a server for every task. And so it's really, really important to think about service-oriented architectures, or another way to think about that is event-driven architectures. Only resources are used when you are doing an event or when a customer is doing an event. Now we're using the resources, and when they're not using the resources. So very, very important. Another good thing to think about when you are in AWS specifically is, how am I going to utilize managed services? And no, I don't mean managed services as a third-party team from a partner, as much as we like to help our customers with that. I mean managed services as far as what AWS products offer. So if you think of things like RDS, Elasticache, DynamoDB, Lambda, right? Amplify is another good one. This is AWS's managed services. So it's still pay as you go, but you're not managing the underlying infrastructure. And that may not be, that may not be visible for an automatic savings, but what it is going to do, if you think back to the ROI, it's going to save on human resources and training efforts, in which case that is going to maximize ROI. Remember those three things that we talked about. And so when you are not managing the underlying infrastructure, you're actually getting more on your ROI, because those employees are now able to focus on other more important stuff, and then have AWS managed services be able to focus on the things that you don't want your team focusing on. So please utilize managed services when you can, and it's going to decrease overhead and ultimately maximize your return on investment. Tagging is huge. And so when I talked about earlier, and maybe I just briefly mentioned it, but I mentioned a centralized IT architecture. And when we have a centralized IT architecture, we want to break down our resources per business unit or per environment, or maybe even per both. And that's where tagging comes in, because you can tag all your resources for the purpose of that resource. And then when you are looking at your dashboard, what you are monitoring, or your utilization reports at the end of the week or the end of the month, you can see which resources are costing you which amount of money. And you can break that down by business unit or by environment, or even by person who has spun up. So it's important to understand and to have a plan to tag and a methodology to tag as you are spinning up resources. And that methodology needs to be implemented across your organization, or at least across the people who are working in the AWS environment or your cloud environment, to be able to tag your resources, one, for cost optimization purposes, to be able to see where your environment is, and then two, just to have a better understanding of your inventory, right? And this could be huge when you talk about security architectures, or if you're going for compliances, or any number of reasons. Tagging is so important and so fundamental to your cloud environment that it is absolutely necessary to have a tagging methodology in place and implemented for your team. So AWS has a ton of services for cost optimization, like I said at the beginning of this, and I'm just going to call out one that I think is not used enough, at least what I've seen from our customers and from customers abroad, and that's AWS Trusted Advisor. Trusted Advisor is awesome. What it does is that if you have business support, you are able to leverage cost optimization in Trusted Advisor. Cost optimization, it will literally go through your resource as if you hired a third-party consultant and tell you where it thinks that you can save money. So if I have a number of EC2 instances running and they're only running at 60% utilization, Trusted Advisor will not only say, hey, these instances, you could downsize, but it'll also tell me that it suggests these instances as opposed to this for this reason, and all the way down. And it does it with databases. It can do it with load balancers, right? If you have EBS volumes that you're paying for that you're not really using, it'll tell you about that. Trusted Advisor is a great tool among the others that you see here for recommending how to save money, how to cost optimize, and in a general sense, all that together returns on your investment. Here at ClearScale, we have a great cost optimization practice. And I'm going to talk about two clients that we've done this for. And the first one is Bloomreach. If you don't know anything about Bloomreach, they help their customers' digital e-commerce solution grow through their own SaaS platform. And it relates to delivering key customer metrics and growing their customers' business through their own SaaS platform for digital enhancement. And so they were actually born in the cloud. They are not modern. So they started, I believe it was 2009, and they were born in AWS. And so it's not like they weren't, familiar with what's going on or, how best to architect. They had a good architecture. But the problem is that they had a legacy architecture. Yes, in 2023, you can have a cloud legacy architecture, 100%. And so this is what was going on with Bloomreach, is they had this cloud legacy architecture. And so ClearScale saw an opportunity to modernize them in a way that ultimately saved them on ROI. And so one of the things that we did was we modernized their EMR cluster. EMR is Elastic MapReduce in AWS. It's a big data tool. We were able to modernize that to some serverless technologies and break it down into microservices. And as well as incorporate auto scaling so that the instances that they were using could be scaled down when they're not using them. A couple of these implementations, and they had a 25% reduction in cloud expenditures. A lot of times customers say, well, if I want to decrease cloud spend, why would I hire a third party and spend X amount of money for them to do that? I would just lose all the pricing that I would save anyways on the cloud reductions. Well, that's not necessarily true. Because again, if you think about return on investment as opposed to upfront costs, go back to that graph that I showed right at the beginning. The return on investment is what matters. So when you have an initial, let's say, high purchase cost, that may be true. But if you're able to save 25%, like Bloomberg did in reduction of cloud expenditure, over time, you're going to make up that money and in fact, save a bunch of money. And that's what we did with them. Second one was a developer platform. And what they had is that they had a very, very monolith architecture for what they were offering their customers. And so not only that, they had their developers be able to spin up an unlimited amount of resources, and they needed governance and compliance to be able to limit that. And this is where service catalogs came into play. We were able to service catalog their environment for dev and test, and so that their dev team cannot just spin up unlimited resources. And believe it or not, this saved them a ton of money, as well as helped with their security posture, because they didn't have to worry about developers spinning up environments that could be accessed through the back door or taken over by brute force or whatever that potential risk was. So we introduced service catalogs to them. We implemented it, and there was a large amount of savings moving forward after that. And so that's with transparency and governance, and our architects were able to find that. And so we do offer, like I said, great cost optimization services. We do audits, we do storage optimization, billing monitoring through our managed services team, right-sizing instances. And if you were to work with our managed services team, you get a designated service delivery manager. So let me walk this forward, or I guess walk this back a little bit. When you have ClearScale as your managed services provider, we come on, we're on board, we're extension of your IT team, but we also provide a service delivery manager. Think of that as an ongoing project manager. When you have an ongoing project manager like that, they're going to start to understand your environment from a holistic standpoint as time goes on. And so we have our service delivery manager sit down with you once a week or once a month, depending on the offering that you take up on, and go over what you've spent on and how to be more cost efficient in your environment. And so it's not just an automated machine recommending things, it's an actual person, along with the tools that we provide our customers to review those billing and usage reports and how to bring the cost down, right? This is, yet again, a good example of return on investment. When you are investing in a partner like ClearScale to come on board and be an extension of your team, you will find a return in X amount of time, depending on the environment, to have cost optimization and ultimately save dollars over the long run. So it's like I said, we can fit any budget, right? Our managed services team can be for startups. We have 3 tiers: one for smaller businesses, one for medium businesses, and one for large businesses. And so far, all the businesses that we've worked with have had good experiences and have seen our cost optimization practice do wonders for them. For the next step, go ahead and scan the QR code or reach out to your current account executive that you may have at ClearScale, or go to the ClearScale website. Reach out to us. It's no cost to get someone like myself on the phone and talk you through any questions you may have, or maybe even do some preliminary architecture design. Or if you just want to talk about cost optimization practices that you've seen, or have questions around where you think you should go in the future, I am here available, as well as my colleagues and your account executives here, to talk you through that for no cost, and just talk with you about some of these things and our offerings, so that we can align strategically at the end of the day to really service your business and help you grow in your cloud maturity. Again, my name's Anthony Loss. I hope you found this useful. If you have any questions, like I said, go ahead and reach out to us. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I hope you learned some stuff on cloud optimization. Thank you.